Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us all. We're dialing in here from quite a few different time zones on the panel here, and I'm sure many of our guests are as well. Today we're going to be talking about off the charts and what that really means, cruising to destinations a little bit less well known, so certainly not what we would traditionally call the milk run from Cannes down to Saint-Tropez. And we're very grateful for our panel of guests today. We'll have a quick introduction through everybody, then we'll get moving forward with some discussions. And during the discussions, if anybody has any questions that are watching us, please just put them in the chat comments, and we'll get round to them at the most appropriate point and make sure you get heard, and as well as we can answer all of your questions. So going from the top here, we have Captain Maiwenn. If you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, and what you do.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. My name is Maiwenn. I'm a Master 3000. I'm also an Ice Navigator Level 2. I specialize in Arctic navigation and I consult for vessels in the Arctic, making sure that they have a smooth trip. So I work on board. I've spent the last 7 years up in the Arctic, taking people on the adventures of their lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Sounds very interesting, very exciting. Where are you at the moment, Maiwenn? Somewhere a little bit warmer here.
Yes, I'm currently in Antigua at the moment.
Very good. Cool. So I think next down the list we had Joost. Where have you gone, Joost? Well, we'll move on to Piers. Just
good afternoon, everyone.
This is Piers Flood. Introduce yourself, please, Piers.
My name is Piers Flood. I'm a former yacht engineer, spent 11 years at sea, starting way back in 1994. I've seen a massive development in the industry in terms of the size of yachts, but also the destinations they're going. It used to be very much a milk run, Caribbean, south of France, Mediterranean. Now we're seeing a lot more yachts go off the charts. Since leaving seagoing, I spent a lot of time with a couple of major management companies, both building yachts. I've been involved with the build of about 20 yachts, including some that have really ventured off the charts. And I currently work for Dolly Yachts, managing a considerable operational fleet, as well as a couple of yacht projects that are venturing off the charts.
Thank you very much, Piers. Joost, you're back with us.
I am, yeah, definitely. No issue here. I'm Joost, working with the company Freepack, owning Doggers Bank as a brand, and I reawakened that a few years ago. And I'm very passionate about those boats because they're the absolute miniature explorer super yachts that have proven themselves to be able to go anywhere. And I really look forward to share some knowledge here with the audience, with the panelists that we have met in the past weeks. A little bit more about my role within Freepack for 15 years. I've worked as designer, designed myself various offshore and explorer yachts. At the moment, I'm fully focused on the more commercial side of the business and Doggers Bank, because that's the brand I really want to push forward. So here we are. I look forward, people.
Exciting stuff. And Matt Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, I am one of the founders and CEO of Farsounder, and my team and I at Farsounder, we develop a 3D forward-looking sonar system for navigation. So basically, we tell you what's in front of the vessel before you get there so that you don't hit things. We're based in Rhode Island in the northeast of the United States, and about 25 years ago when we started working on this technology, our motivations really came from an environmental impact point of view. How can we help vessels avoid hitting rocks, causing oil spills? And how can we help vessels avoid hitting whales, causing whale ship strike deaths? And so that led to founding Farsounder in 2001. And since 2005, we've been shipping equipment all over the world to a variety of market sectors, including super yachts, which is obviously quite important. So I'm glad to be here today.
Interesting, Matt. So I think we're going to start really sort of talking about, you know, what is off the charts, and I guess sort of because we're not talking about going through, you know, the milk run and being able to sort of drop anchor and visit a port every other night. It's about sort of the autonomy of the vessels. So, you know, we're really just sort of going to have a quick look at how capable are the vessels. So I think, you know, Maiwenn, maybe if you come in here sort of first with your onboard, you know, experience. So the capability of a yacht and the issues of not being able to drop anchor and visit a port or call up an agent, these sorts of things, from a crew perspective and also from a guest perspective, owner's perspective.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I obviously work up north. I've also spent some time in other areas, which we're going to cover off the charts. But the level of independence that you need in these areas is enormous. Obviously, you know, if you're heading north into Greenland or into the Northwest Passage, there's really nobody and nothing that will come and help you. So you have to be able to take everything that you need. You need to make sure that your vessel has the redundancy. You need to be able to achieve these things. I mean, I just love looking at these pictures. This is us in East Greenland breaking ice with Nansen Explorer, which is a 72 meter A1 ice class.
Amazing. So, I mean, on how are the crew prepared for this? The owners prepared for these, or the charter guests? I mean, what sort of have you come across in that respect? Are they really prepared, or is it that sort of dream of let's just pop up and see some ice?
I think there's various levels of that. I think, you know, for the crew, we have to make sure that people understand what they're getting into, what the safety protocols are. Obviously, for most of the vessels that I run up there, we have a polar water operations manual. We have very specific safety standards that we operate under. For the owners, it's making sure that everybody's prepared for the possibilities, the weather, what might happen, how things might not work the way that you think they're going to.
Yeah. And Piers, from a technical perspective and a yacht management perspective, how does all this filter through to your sort of preparation before these vessels decide to head off?
So in reality, we found that it has to be looked at in two ways. There's, first of all, the financial and technical side. So you might be used to, say, doing a Mediterranean milk run, as it used to be called, up and down the coast. If you're venturing off the charts, then you probably need to consider what spares you're going to have. So it's probably 2, 3, 4, 5 times the amount of spares and cost. Also, you need to think about, you know, how are you going to insure for these passages? And does the vessel need modification? So potentially there's a financial outlay, but as Maiwenn also said, there's a lot of thought that goes into how the crew are trained. So if you've got, say, an engineer who is used to working with telephone assistance, he's not going to get that, she's not going to get that when they venture off the chart. So they need to have the training and preparedness. The whole crew, we also think, need to be planning for disaster scenarios. So if your navigation system breaks down, if your stabilizer stops working, or, you know, if the HVAC stops working, how are you going to deal with this? If you're off the charts, you can't pick up the phone to the local service representative and say, please come down tomorrow morning. It's like, oh my goodness, we have to deal with this. So part of that is planning the scenarios. What could go wrong? How do we deal with this? And how do we avoid it becoming a charter ending emergency, or even worse, a life or danger, certainly. So there's quite a bit of thought that goes into this.
Yeah, and Matt, with your the far sounder sort of capabilities, I mean, are the crew coming to you and, you know, requesting this? Are they realizing that or is it coming from the management companies? Where typically to people, where does the conversation start with you guys on what you can provide for the sort of safety elements?
Well, our conversation really starts at all levels, from you know, the younger deck crew who are just kind of looking around and seeing what interesting things are out there. But we like to talk to the decision makers, Those are the captains, the owner's rep, the managements. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about our customer base is off the charts is not just polar areas. It's also tropical areas. And if you think about from a navigation point of view, there are, well, we've only mapped about 26% of the world's oceans. And in shallow coastal areas, there's only about half of those areas have been mapped. And most of that is in the main shipping channel. So if you think about from the yachting point of view, your guests don't want to be sitting in the shipping channel. They want to be going off into that, beautiful lagoon. They want to have dinner in that little cove away from those channels. And the charts don't have that information. So when we look at navigating off the charts, there's a whole bunch of different things that I think are important. There are obvious tools that people use above the water, like camera systems. So like here's a picture that Maiwenn had sent me up in the Arctic, and they're using a sort of a traditional thermal camera, and you can see a pretty nice picture there. And then maybe Maiwenn, you can tell a little bit about these types of cameras as well.
Cool.
Maiwenn, you're muted, so we don't hear you.
So this one is a Pano Blue 3D camera, which we had on Nansen Explorer. And each one of these little dots that you see on the chart on the left is an image saved. And so through the entire trip, this camera is recording the image completely all around you. You can either look at it as a visual straight ahead, or you can look at it as this, what we call the little world view. And they also are bringing one out now that is infrared. And I'm super excited to be trying to trial this up in the Arctic this summer.
And from Farsounder's point of view, the forward-looking sonars that we develop are really a clear complement to what's looking up above the water. We're looking down below the water. And so we can give you a picture of everything ahead of the vessel in real time. But we also build a map of everywhere we've been. And you can actually share that map across the Farsounder fleet, if you choose to, anonymously. And so everything in that pie wedge that you see ahead of the vessel is real time ahead. And that strip behind us is that map that we're building. And so crowdsourcing, I think, is becoming a tool that is more and more interesting to a lot of vessel operators. And last year we launched a new functionality that lets users actually share their data anonymously across the fleet. And in exchange, they get the aggregate map back from everybody else. And then we also make contributions anonymously on their behalf to Seabed 2030. So it's a way to help use the crowd to understand.
Sharing the data. Very important.
I think that's usually important to create that form of awareness among boaters and yacht owners. And from a design perspective, everything mentioned also by Piers, the equipment and the things that come along with the training, the accessories that you need on board to be prepared, but also spare parts. You have to address that from the design up. I think you have to be aware that there's never enough storage space on a boat. And even with the equipment seen, if you can implement that in an existing build or from a new build, it starts with a conversation. What do we want to achieve? What do we want to see or contribute to scientific research? And I think that's the beauty of today, that we can all be part of that and grow things as a community, and the yachting community.
I mean, that sort of ties in a bit, Maiwenn, about sort of, we talk about explorer yachts and going, whether it's to the Arctic or to the Pacific but are we talking about huge explorer yachts? Are we talking about these mega 70 meter or, so getting down to sort of the design and the size of yachts and convincing the owner to give away some space because he needs to have massive amounts of storage for this self-reliance. So sort of the size of vessels, Maiwenn. I mean,
I'm a big fan of a pocket cruiser, to be honest, which Joost will be very glad to hear. I mean, I think there's a lot of balance in there. You do need a certain amount of storage, but in general, we're talking, I believe, 6 to 8 weeks worth of storage, it's not the end of the world. If you think that when you do a charter season, you're pretty stocked up when you start. So I don't think we need a massive boat.
Yeah.
Of that. Is that Gale Force?
Yeah, that's Gale Force in the Antarctic region. She made a few passages there with the captain, very well prepared, very well aware of the harsh conditions involving local people already from the southern point of Chile towards the south.
Wow.
And she proved to be capable as a small explorer vessel, along with Beathuk, who did a Northwest Passage the second time last summer. That even smaller explorers can. They need less crew. Obviously, crew need to be prepared, prepare their guests on board, and the ship itself. It's
from a design perspective, Piers, like what are you sort of finding? I mean, what are the do's and the don'ts, the necessities? Well, we took, the gross tonnage, those sorts of things, Piers.
I think as Maiwenn and used to have said, most well put together, well founded yachts can venture off the charts with adequate preparation, adequate equipment. But sometimes the questions come down to, will the guests enjoy it? Because let's face it, the only reason you go to these places is to get a positive experience. If the vessel doesn't have good seakeeping ability, or perhaps the ability to explore in coves with adequate sonar, doesn't have the right communications, then you might be able to do it, but it's not necessarily the most pleasurable experience. So we see a lot of thought go into how are guests going to be kept entertained. So, for instance, in the larger yacht market, you might have 2 or 3 generations of a family on board. The senior generation might really like the idea of going and seeing polar bears, but the junior generation might just want to play a PlayStation or be on the internet. So it's not just can the vessel do it, but will it be pleasurable, and can you cater for all those various interests on board? The other thing we're very well aware of is, and this is unfortunately a size-related query regarding yachts, is if you are to take a long passage to an exotic off-the-charts location like polar regions, or like some of the far-flung Pacific areas, then there's naturally going to be a long transit time, which some guests might not like. So certainly at the larger end of the market, we do ask the question, how are we going to get people on or off? Is it helicopter? Is it vessels, own tenders that perhaps need to have extended seakeeping ability other than just to run into a marina? So it's one thing saying what makes a vessel capable, but another to say what actually makes the experience enjoyable.
I think another point related to that, Pierce, is also in the worst case scenarios, evacuations. How do you get people off the vessel? For a lot of our customers, I've noticed a lot of them have dive kit on board. So if you're going to these exotic off-the-chart locations, scuba diving is one of the big draws to those areas. And so what happens in a dive emergency? You can't just go to your local recompression chamber. So I've been seeing a lot of these vessels having recompression chambers on board. There's some nice inflatable, relatively small, compact ones, but that comes down to training and space for those. And then if you do need to evacuate someone for an emergency, if you're flying in and out, you can't do that if you have a decompression sickness necessarily. So there's needs to be thought about not only the self-sustainability of the operations on board, but also the safety and medical attention for the types of activities that you might be doing.
I mean, this is again, the safety comes down to as well giving away space, doesn't it? I mean, when you're having a conversation with an owner who wants to, build an Explorer, and you're talking to them about all the necessities of having these emergency supplies and a different type of tender or things like this, there is definitely going to be they're going to have to give away space, aren't they? So again, how do you cope with that, or what are the reactions of the owners when they can't have the big master bedroom, or they can have a big one, but it's going to be a little bit smaller?
I'm really happy with this question, and actually, going a little bit backwards in that. What makes a good explorer? I think fundamental in Explorer Motor Yacht world is a displacement hull, and you achieve that with, for instance, steel or aluminum, but the displacement shape, round bilge, even give you comfort and volume. And for a lot of accessories and equipment, which mentioned now, doesn't necessarily need to be all the time inside or in a cabinet dominant in the interiors. It can also be somewhere hidden under the floor where there can still be a lot of space. When Tenders mentioned, we know that even on the smaller Explorer yachts, people share experiences, what works, what doesn't work. So we've seen Milpro tenders being very favorable. I know that they are also being used, and maybe we can relate on that by the Nansen Explorer, because they seem to work when you want to go out there and think of freeboard, think of the hull type, think of the reinforcements done to it, or how easily they can be maintained and repaired. So that, I think, when it comes to boat design, you create a certain foundation, which on a displacement round bilge yacht makes sense from the space and storage point of view. And going a little bit deeper in that round bilge element, comfort on a boat, because you don't sail in only beautiful weather areas. So you get into storms or wind swell. How we know that in the north and in the south we have a different swell than in Mediterranean. So the motions on the boat, and even the deceleration, so the way that motions are dampened, help people, the majority of people on board, to avoid or to minimize the risk of seasickness. And a lot of that experience comes from the US Navy, where they have done a lot of studies to investigate why the people on board got seasick, and then they're not fit to fly. And relating all those studies back into yachting learned us that when you design a boat and you do pay attention to the motions on the boat and the accelerations, which often make people seasick or giving you that uncomfortable feeling, make total sense when you design an Explorer, because that makes a huge difference to owners when you really can design for comfort.
I think we were touching on a point earlier on that about sort of educating owners, also about sort of cruising speeds. And for them, wanting to go from A to B, when they were maybe in the Mediterranean or whatever, and being able to cruise at 12 knots. But these sorts of things, aren't possible because of the regions maybe they're in, Maiwenn, or because it's a better idea to bring down the speeds for fuel efficiency. What? You're on mute.
I think it's one of the things that is definitely we don't factor in nearly enough, is the fact that if we're navigating in areas we don't really know what's going on underneath us, maybe we have ice around us, maybe the visibility is poor, then we have to slow down. And that's one of the things that you have to factor in from your planning stage from the beginning. And you have to make sure that everybody else who is, so the owners and the crew, everybody understands that this is what will be happening. And I do a lot of voyage planning and itinerary preparation. And I always make sure that if we're operating in areas where I know we may have issues, I factor in a much longer time allowance, because, in the end, if you slow down, 90% of the things that are going to cause you a problem are no longer a problem. And if you've got yourself into a situation where you're in that 10%, then you probably didn't do enough planning.
On the topic of slowing down, I think there's some other benefits that are also important to mention. So, Maiwenn, you said your fuel efficiency. I think we're probably all aware of that. But there's also a safety question from a marine mammal point of view. So a lot of these places off the charts are habitats where whales are living. And for the great whales, the large ones, ship strike is one of the 2 leading causes of death for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's dramatic when they get hit. They might get killed, they might survive, but it's a dramatic impact on them. And when you go slower, your impact, sorry for the pun, on the animal is much lower. And speed is significantly one way of reducing risk when trying to avoid whale ship strikes. But there's other tools as well. So obviously, that's one of the things that was our motivation I talked about earlier. Our products can be used to safely detect whales ahead of the vessel. And here's a data set from a couple of humpback whales that we were looking at. Equipment like ours is safe for marine life, and it's one other way to reduce risk. And using that in conjunction with cameras, with well-trained crew, with speed adjustments, that is a way to help reduce risk on those animals. And of course, when you're going slower, you're also making less noise. And human-induced noise into the ocean is a big topic. At the commercial level, IMO has proposed guidelines on this already. And by going slower, you're also producing less engine noise, less vibrations that is disrupting the marine life in those areas. So speed has benefits besides just fuel efficiency.
Well, and in addition to that, I'd like to mention that we've investigated installation of those piece of equipment that Matthew is pointing out on existing boats and new builds. It's super easy to install in the first place. And we got a comment on inland waterways and rivers and such. So you mentioned marine environment and animals. But when you go slower and you consider in most, let's say, coastal or inland waterways, you can't even speed up. And then you can also imagine going into shallow water areas, going slower, that with these sonars you can also be more, let's say, comfortable on what you encounter on sense of the seabed underneath you. So it does make sense to me, at least, that you equip your boat with such a type of equipment to be more prepared also when going closer into rivers, bays, go explore more coastal areas.
Sticking with the sort of the science topic, the scientific sort of topic, and trying to get owners and charter guests involved a little bit more rather than just going to visit and getting out the camera. What sort of experience have you guys had with enthusiastic owners, or even donating a cabin to a scientist so they can join in on the charter and help out with tagging or collecting data or anything like that, Maiwenn?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So the photo we just saw, which was Nansen Explorer in East Greenland, that's actually a science trip, and we had 12 scientists on board and a principal, and we were cruising down the coast of East Greenland, doing bottom samples, sampling plastics in the water, taking video of the rock scouring, and that brought so much value to the principal. It made her trip to have these amazingly interesting people to be able to talk to and interact with, and gave her a purpose. And I think sometimes, I meet a lot of owners who really want to see these amazing things, and they really want to see polar bears and the ice, but they'd also like a purpose with it. And to provide a purpose, I think, is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
I think there's...
Oh, go on. So I was just going to ask Piers from that touch point with the owners when they're commissioning, or whether they're interested in an explorer type yacht. What's kind of like the ratio between guys that just want a nice big chunky sexy yacht and the ones that actually want to really use it for some good or to really go off the charts?
Well, I think we're seeing, as the yacht market matures, we've got many yacht owners who have either been in for one or two generations of a family, or newer, younger owners that come in and don't want to do the same thing. So we're definitely seeing more appetite to explore the charts. And with that comes the reason for doing it. If you are to spend 4, 5, 6, 7 days on a passage to get to somewhere really off the charts, are you just going to look at penguins or polar bears, which is nice, but you can enrich that experience so much more by doing something on the science side. And as I mentioned earlier, if you've got 2 or 3 generations as guests on board, you can involve the kids, you can involve the grandparents and the parents, all with this exciting stuff. So yeah, we get a lot of thought from our clients when they are either considering these passages or building yachts to take off the charts adventures. What exciting stuff can we do? And it also ticks the box of giving back. Yachting can potentially be seen by some people as a negative, but if we can give something back, that the question becomes not should we, but why wouldn't we?
Well, yeah.
That's
I mean, that goes on to Matt and the seabed, 2030, and the things that you guys are involved with about collecting the data and giving it back to the bigger community, if you like.
Absolutely. Pierce touched on a phrase that I use all the time: why not? These vessels are going to these places anyway, and so in Maiwenn, there's sort of 3 different types of citizen science activities that yachts can be doing. They can be like the Nansen Explorer, where it's a specific ship with specialized equipment and specialized scientists on board. Those are fantastic vessels doing a lot of really great science, and we're involved with a number of ships like that. There is the slightly lower effort where you're going to be going somewhere anyway, and you have an extra cabin and you can bring a scientist along and just use what you have on board. And there's some great organizations like International Seakeeper Society and Yachts for Science that work on matching scientists with vessels of opportunity. But then there's this 3rd category, the why not category. These boats and ships have some impressive technology on board that you're using already. So without adding any extra technology, no extra equipment, use what you have on board, and those observations can be really valuable. So we started at Farsounder using crowdsourced bathymetry, and I touched on that briefly before. We have customers going places where there have been no surveys, and as an example, the Canadian Hydrographic Service started a proof of concept of integrating non-official measurements into an official chart. And because Farsounder customers in their crowdsourced measurements have such high quality meta, which is the information about where's the GPS antenna relative to the sounder, the Canadian Hydrographic Service could calculate the error, it fit within their error budget, and there is Farsounder customer collected data on chart 7053 in the Northwest Passage, which to me is really exciting because this vessel was not going out to do a survey. They were just collecting data along the way using their standard navigation equipment.
Super cool.
In the newest release of our software that just came out last week, we've added other types of observations besides depth. We now have whale observations and trash observation button. So when the crew is on board and they see floating trash, they can push the button. It'll be sent to our servers. We anonymously pass it on to IC, which is a nonprofit mapping trash. And then whale observations, those will be passed on to Whale Alert and also to OceanWise. So the functionality to collect those observations has just been launched to our customers, and we'll be adding the functionality to pass them on in the near future. Both of those things are, you're not going anywhere special beyond your normal operations, and the crew sees things that are valuable. So why not contribute? Because it has a lot of value to the community. So It's an advantage that can be taken for by the crews and the passengers and the guests going these places.
Yeah. As you say, it benefits everybody, and we're not even talking about necessarily in the polar regions or in the Pacifics. We can be talking about around the Med as well, the areas that aren't necessarily mapped as well as they should be, or whether there's, debris, trash, etc., around that. So it's, it should be used in all areas, really. All of the guys should be using it. When we're sort of talking a bit more about sort of planning for these things, when we talk about polar codes and things like that, Maiwenn, where do these come in? Where are they necessary to come in? Vessel size?
So currently polar code is applicable to vessels over 500 gross tons. There are a couple of parts of it that are applicable to all vessels, so the Marpole and so the side of it. Next year, vessels under 300 gross tons are going to come in under polar code, and it really starts very early in the planning stages, because your vessel will have to be classed. It will have to have a polar safety certificate. And so quite often I start working with boats when they start first thinking about going to the Arctic. This is my first question to them. Do you have a polar safety certificate? And if not, then let's start working on your polar water operations manual and getting you compliant, making sure that your crew have the basic or advanced polar training that they need in order to be able to go to these places.
And we had a question from one of our listeners, George. What is the most common factor overlooked in preparing for such a voyage from both perspectives? I guess, Maiwenn, from your perspective, from Piers, your sort of perspective. People, I guess, thinking about the glamorous sort of nature of it, but the practicality of it. So is there and as George has said here, what do we do about refueling, provisioning, waste management, handling of the grey water, these sorts of things?
So I think George's question is obviously huge, and we could probably do a whole roundtable on George's question alone. One of the most overlooked things I see is manpower planning, and how you are going to carry on operating and still do all of those amazing fun things that yachts want to do with the toys, and operate a significantly upscaled 24-hour watch. You may not be able to anchor easily. You may be holding station. You may be working through ice all night. And then, so how do you manage those manpower considerations and keep everybody within sensible hours of rest? So that's one thing I think that definitely needs thinking about before people step on into this. How do you handle refueling, provision, and waste management? This is a huge challenge. Wow. I'm sure we all know this. I will say that most of the places that we go to, no matter how remote you are actually usually still in somebody's backyard, and some of these things can be solved. It is possible. This is Kanak, and this is in the very, very, very far north of Greenland. So you may be able to organize fueling from one of the fuel barges. You may find a small shop with some provisions. You definitely have to remember that everything you buy is something that somebody else can't buy, and this is something that's really important. So basically a lot of planning ahead of time, making sure that you have all you need, and then making sure that you have shore stops in places. That last photo was Nuuk. Nuuk is the capital of Greenland, and they have the facilities to handle these things. So no matter how much time you want to spend away, at some point you have to touch in on somewhere where you can deal with these things. Yeah.
Piers, there on sort of certification and things like this, and the paperwork side of things. You're nodding your head like going, oh yeah.
Well, as an engineer, I would love to come up with some typical engineering or technical challenge, but I have to agree with Maiwenn. It's the human factors that are the most common things. In our super yacht sector that I work in, generally the answer is yes to any question raised by owners or guests, as long as it's safe, as long as it's legal. But going onto the charts, whether it's a really cold polar region or a really hot region like some areas of the Pacific, you've got to sometimes say no, and you have to take the time to prepare, to plan, which is so important, but also run the scenarios. How are we going to deal with a medical emergency on board, a breakdown of the HVAC if it's plus 35 outside? These things all come down, unfortunately, to the human factor, and it's that planning. And once you've worked out how do we do this and what could go wrong, to drill time and time again, if X happens, how do we deal with that safely and effectively?
Yeah, we had another question here from Tony Griffiths about crew training, and is this current level of crew training sufficient if vessels are going to go, off piste, as it were, whether it's Arctic or down to the Pacific, but where they're not going to be able to sort of drop anchor or go into a port or marina for a couple of weeks. Are the basic crew, all levels of crew, trained well enough? Maiwenn, maybe your experiences.
So I'll answer this question directly as best I know. Basic training for polar regions is not sufficient for the master of a vessel. You should have advanced polar, and also your chief mate should have advanced polar. You can be accepted from this if you do take an ice navigator who is qualified.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to chime in from the environmental protections point of view. There are different regulations in different territorial waters as far as what you can do legally when operating around marine mammals. I've had the great pleasure and privilege of having done a bunch of data collection efforts working with whales over the past couple of years, and it is a transformational experience. We spent days on offshore. On the largest boat was about 45 feet long with 60-foot whales around us, and it was amazing. And in the U.S. we have very clear, very strict, and very well thought out regulations. You're not allowed to approach whales within a certain distance. Depending on species, there's different regulations for distances. But those types of regulations vary from place to place. For example, in French Polynesia, one of the big tourist attractions has been being able to snorkel or scuba dive with whales, and that regulation has changed this year. Can't do that anymore, legally at least. And so knowing what are the different regulations as you go to these different areas, you might be a captain who has a lot of experience in Indonesia, and perhaps from a navigational point of view in French Polynesia, it's very similar, but from the regulatory point of view, there's really different things you have to pay attention to. And so people like Pierce's team, I presume, one of the values you bring is also where are you going, what are the local regulations that you need to know about. So it's not just ship handling, it's also how you interact with the rest of that environment.
Yeah, and if I can just chime in on that as well, it's also about the local culture. It's about knowing where you can go, where you can't go, where you should go, and where you shouldn't go. So I think a lot of people see the idea of a pilot as being an ice pilot or an ice navigator, and I think that that's a bit of a misnomer in terms of what actually happens in polar waters. Because the knowledge is so much more than just being about the ice. I mean, I think if we think about it, ice is just another hard thing, and we drive around hard things every day in our yachting life. We drive through a mooring field, we drive into a marina, we park between other boats. So in lots of ways, actually, for an ice navigator, the ice is actually one of the least important parts of the equation. It's a very important part, but it's not the primary resource that you're taking someone along for. You're taking them along because they know the whale regulations. Hopefully they're a member of IATA or IECO, and they can give you the social guidelines to make sure that things run smoothly for you and for the local people, and everything is safe. And it's a whole big picture.
We have another question in here for Matt. Get up here, Matt. Stand up, Matt. Chris Freeman. There's a question. It's down there. So yeah, can you read that, Matt?
I can. So this is a very hydrographic survey related question. And so when you're measuring the sea floor, there are lots of things that influence those measurements. One of which is, how does the sound travel through the water? And the sound waves get bent by the speed of sound as it varies through the water depths. And that bending of sound waves is called refraction. And if you want to make the most accurate, precise measurement possible, then you need to measure what is the speed of sound through the water column, and then you use a simple calculation to correct for that. And this is what's done for official hydrographic surveys. With Farsounder systems, because we are a forward-looking sonar, we don't have the ability to measure what the water's like in front of us yet, because we haven't been there yet. So we can't use the traditional tools. What this means is we are not making corrections for the speed of sound in our systems, and that results in a slightly less accurate measurement. But if you think about from a navigation point of view, you want to know, is the water X meters deep enough for you? But do you really care, is it 10 meters deep or 10.01 meters deep? Maiwenn, you're probably not going to say, yes, it's safe for me to transit here because there is 1.3 centimeters clearance. That's good enough. So those aren't the types of decisions that are being made using Farsounder equipment. That being said, without using these fancy hydrographic tools, we are seeing pretty close to about 3% error from ground truth measurements. And that is getting very close to IHO special order and 1A, 1B survey grade performance. We're not trying to be a survey sonar, but we're getting very close to that, even with these different changes. However, when we talk about error, besides just the speed of sound, a huge piece of error is the metadata, which is, where is your sensor relative to the sonar, the GPS sensor, the sonar, and so forth. And most of the crowdsource measurements from these various crowdsource initiatives kind of ignore that metadata value. With Farsounder systems, because we have certified technicians who are doing the commissioning, they're ensuring that that metadata gets entered accurately, and that reduces a significant piece of error.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, we're heading up to about sort of the 50 minutes here, so we might answer some more sort of questions that are coming in from our viewers in a little bit. But if we're looking forward, let's sort of go through the panel and see what's coming up, what everyone's getting involved in. Joost, maybe if you can start first there. What are the projects you're getting involved in now? What are you looking forward to? What are you expecting in the next few years from your sort of side of things?
Well, I think in general we see a pickup in explorers. Miniature explorers seem to be popular. There are different various brands, very well appreciated. And I think for Dogger's Bank there is also a future in that, because the history, the heritage have delivered so much experience already, and we have now since we re-awakened the brand, a third boat in build. I foresee in the next year a lot of let's say traction on the brand. We measure that, of course. That's positive. And what I do want to bring, I do want to bring that awareness to future owners. Matt informed me well about what he can do on that, and with seakeepers, how he collaborates with them. And we involve that knowledge already in the specification. So the specs have grown over the years by the experience put into it from previous owners. So it's in the design already growing towards the purpose that people use their boats for, and how they experience it. So what we've learned, we have implemented in the design, and we do that. Let's say we continue doing that. So I think over the
it's
years,
a constant improvement. Yeah,
it's a constant improvement since 1966. So that's I think valuable assets of what we deliver. Yeah.
Perfect. Piers, from your sort of perspective, what are you expecting this year, the coming years? The good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's be honest.
It's an exciting time. So we're seeing a definite shift now to people, our clients, but also I think the wider population that's involved with any type of marine activity. They're moving away from having an asset, a yacht, and seeking to use that to have an experience in life. And that then naturally leads to people wanting to go off the charts. People seem to be looking for more adventure now, rather than just having a dinner in a lovely restaurant in Cannes or Monaco or Fort Lauderdale or Antigua. They want to go and do something, because they can have dinner anywhere, anytime they want, but they can't necessarily have that unique adventure that a yacht gives them, going somewhere really exciting. We're seeing people spend longer time on board, and that comes into the narrative of a lot of the off the charts areas become fairly long to get to. The passage is quite long. So from our point of view, we're also very interested in how do we enable a CEO of a multinational corporation to conduct his business on board. Does that mean better comms, more office environment, better video conferencing? But the most exciting thing in coming into the MAPS narrative is there's also much more consideration now to the environment. How can we do something in yachting that gives back in terms of perhaps going off the charts with bringing about some good, useful scientific data, but also how can we reduce our impact? So if we are going to venture off the charts, can we do that in a less environmentally impact way? And what can we also give to the local community? Are we still going to fly our fresh produce in from the States, from Europe? Or are we going to go ashore and buy it from this little island community? It might not be up to the standard the chef is used to, but it's local and it's giving something back. And that's a really exciting change we're seeing.
Yeah.
And it can also be fun. And I think that adds also to the experience on board. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. It's also a way how it's brought to the people and make it fun.
How it's delivered. It's relaxing it a bit more, isn't it? It's having the owners and the charter guests give something back, which I think, it is a very important factor. And it doesn't matter on their age, let's face it. It's probably, far more enjoyable for the kids. Well, actually, probably, and the grandparents. They're probably all really enjoying it, to be honest. So, Maiwenn, what are you up to in the coming months, years, months?
I'm really looking forward to taking some people on an absolutely amazing trip to Greenland this summer. So that's the first half of my summer. I'm also doing some polar water operations manual planning and helping some people who want to kayak through the Northwest Passage, which is a kind of onto the crazy, how big a boat do you need? You don't actually need a very big boat at all. It just depends on your personal assessment of risk and what you're prepared to accept and how uncomfortable you're prepared to be. I get involved in a lot of these things, answering people's questions about what it's like to be in the Northwest Passage, how to prepare. People reach out to me, and I do a lot of consultancy work for that. So that's one part of my summer. And then I'm also doing some fabulous public speaking events. The next one will be the Super Yacht Technology Show in Barcelona, and trying to bring some of the enthusiasm and awareness for that science aspect out to the public, and just make sure that everybody understands that that purpose makes things more fun.
Yeah, perfect. And Matt, what's in store for Far Sounder and your relationships with all of these other great guys? Like I see you mentioned earlier with Graham Somerville, which is a great initiative, Seabed 2030, all of these guys.
Well, obviously, my engineering team is always working on product improvements and making our capabilities go beyond what we're doing today. Part of that is integrations. We're working on a couple of new integrations we hope to be able to announce later this year with some new ECDIS and ECS providers, as well as integration into some vessel autonomy controller systems, focused primarily on the uncrewed surface vessel world, but also bleeding over into the yacht market. However, thinking about how to make things fun, I noticed there's some comments about that, and Maiwenn just said that. And thinking about Pierce's comment of they want an experience, not
Mhm.
just a meal or an asset. One of the initiatives I've been working on over the past couple months that we're going to be launching in about a month or so from now is we're launching a new online on-demand class for
Mhm.
the basics of whale spotting, identification, and safe vessel operations when operating around
Mhm.
whales. This is not a Farsounder product class. This is a industry topic class. And it really occurred to me after spending all this time doing science with the whales, I learned a lot. And every time I spoke to someone about these experiences, their eyes lit up. And
Mm.
one of the reasons so many of the crew get into this industry is they have this draw to the ocean and the amazing things we find there. And so I thought, let's put together a class based on the things that I've learned. Let's
Mhm.
focus it for the vessel operators so that they can be more aware. If you're on the bridge,
Yeah.
you're a bridge crew, you see a splash, you can now, after taking the class, have greater confidence in saying, that was a whale. I think it was
Mm.
this type of species because of these things. You can show off that expertise to the guests on board, bringing a
Yeah.
greater experience and more fun to them. And
Very cool.
hopefully, you'll learn a lot more about how to operate safely around them, which has a
Mm.
positive environmental impact. So I've
Mm.
teamed up with a lot of great guest hosts. We'll be announcing a lot more of that soon. Maiwenn, I know, is going to be helping out in part of it, but a whole range of fantastic people contributing to this. So I'm really excited about this new initiative. We'll be launching it hopefully in about a month or so. Right now,
Yeah.
you can go to farsounder.com/whales to learn more about it and sign up for pre-registration.
Cool. I'll just run through a few quick questions before we hit that hour mark. Maybe for Maiwenn here, with Jana Thomas, we had a question. The key differences between navigating off the charts, Arctic versus Antarctic.
This is actually probably not a question for me because I'm an Arctic girl. I haven't actually been down to the Antarctic yet. I can tell you what it's like to navigate off the charts in the Arctic and some of the ways that that we do that. And I've never been lucky enough to have a Farsounder, which would have been absolutely fabulous. So we've worked a lot on the technique of sending a Zodiac in front of us,
Okay.
navigating slowly. I
Mm.
have found other vessels that have been through areas, and one point I found a Danish Navy warship, and they let me on their bridge to have a look at their navigation program. So basically, any way that you can find the information, that's how
Yeah.
you do it. Any way that you can find the information.
Yeah. We have a question coming back to you, Matt, here on, well, it's to do with insurance and Farsounder. It's from Mattia about, here it is, it's up on screen there. 80% of the time off charts when they were on a trip to Patagonia, no ECDIS, running aground off the charts. Would Farsounder, is it accepted? And that goes through, I guess, all sorts of insurance questions, but is it covered? Is it?
So the Farsounder equipment is not part of SOLAS, so we don't fall under any of the SOLAS regulations. We are an extra piece of equipment. We have a number of customers who are including the Farsounder as part of their risk management system when they're going to the underwriters. It's not like car insurance where if you have a car alarm, you get a $5 a month discount. There is no line item discount because of Farsounder, but it is part of that overall risk assessment that the underwriters are considering. So many of our
It's an
customers,
important element. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, Piers, come get on that sort of question as well. You know, the insurance. Let's talk about, you know, insurance for these sorts of trips.
Yeah, I mean, we very much emphasize, and I think it's come across in some of the comments we've made, that you need to be prepared. Part of that is the crew training, but also to have the conversations with the insurers, and who might, unless you can demonstrate you've done good training and you have a strong management company and a polar code in place and you know what you're doing, might give you a really, really steep premium, or perhaps raise substantially the deductibles. So very much part of that planning process is, we talked about the human factor, the technical factor, but also liaising with people like insurers, perhaps the financiers, if the boat's got some finance on it, to say, look, this is what we're planning to do. How can we show you we've mitigated the risk? And in an ideal situation, if you've got sensible insurers, financiers, they'll listen to the discussion and hopefully won't put too many obstacles in the way or raise your premium too much.
Yeah. Okay, good one. We have a question here from Susie Chisholm. About going into someone else's backyard, which is, you know, people do live here. There are communities there. They're getting on with their own life. And do they want more visitors? What does it bring to them?
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting question. And I think, you know, the first part of the solution is to identify and understand what the cultures and the communities that you are transiting through, the areas that they live in, what they want. And one of the ways you do that is by taking a guide or a polar navigator with you, local knowledge, making sure that you understand and work within the systems that people want. And, you know, often when I arrive somewhere, I'll go and find the hamlet office or the town office, and I'll go and talk to someone and make sure that we make a welcome, that we say hello, that we pay attention to what people are trying to say to us, because often people don't want to tell you no, but they're not necessarily, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're happy with what you're doing, you know, particularly up north, being very aware of, you know, local narwhal areas, hunting, what other people's world perspective is that may be very, very different from yours, and making sure you understand that completely and try and work within it without disturbing.
Yeah. Super cool. Well, I think we're over the hour mark now, guys, but I think we're going to have to do this again, because there was a few questions coming up there and a few conversations that we could have a separate off the charts sort of discussion about. So maybe we'll plan that in another couple of months before you guys all start disappearing, especially you, Maiwenn, disappearing. So I'd like to thank all of you guys, Matthew, Maiwenn, Piers. Thanks very much for your time today, and thanks for everyone for sending in their questions. Keep sending in some questions, or email the guys on the panel if you have any specific questions for the panelists, and we'll see you in the near future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Chris.
For your time.
Bye-bye,
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.